Hello, everybody, to this session of Expert Talk. I'm very delighted that we have today actually changed the format. Today I have two speakers, two industry veterans, which will talk with me about actually what they do for the industry and the beauty of data. So let's directly jump into it. And I would like to hand over to Robert Fry to introduce yourself, and then followed by Neil van der Wouw to introduce yourself.
Dear viewers, obviously very happy to address this audience, and thanks very much, Chris, for the opportunity. I've been in this forwarding industry now for more than 40 years and was in charge of air freight globally at one of the top 5 when I initially started number 1 air freight forwarder in the world. And we have detected a few issues at the time, missing benchmarking data, and after I left the company have started together with some colleagues TAC Index, but we'll talk about the details later on. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Robert, and good day, everybody. My name is Neil van der Wouw. I started in the industry about 30 years ago at KLM, followed by many years as a consultant, last few years with Seabury Consulting, and co-founded Clive together with my Australian partners in 2011.
Okay, since we're going to talk today about data and the usage of data, what I would like to emphasize before we really dive into our talk is that we shouldn't do any, and you shouldn't be doing any forward-looking statements due to antitrust reasons. And as soon as you do, I will have to stop the recording, and then we have to start all over again. So I ask you not to do so. So question to you, Neil, actually, or you start. Why did you launch the products that you're offering to the market?
Yeah, we launched our data service early this year with 3 key elements in mind. The first one is we wanted to get data into the hands of our clients quicker than they were used to. We see data more like fresh fish than French wine. It doesn't get better over time. The value deteriorates quite rapidly. So the fresher you get it into the hands of the clients, the more they can do with it. That's the first reason. Second reason is, and we've been writing about this, we believe that the industry is not well represented by IATA publishing statistics on load factors based on the weight utilization, as that grossly understates how full planes really are. So we've developed a dynamic load factor that takes into account both the volume and the weight utilization of aircraft, and therefore truly showing how full planes really are. And the third element is we believe that with any picture that you make, the higher the pixels, the higher the resolution, the clearer the picture is. And monthly data is quite lumpy data. There's a lot of things happen within the month. So therefore we provide weekly data. So fresher data, some unique insights with the load factor, and a higher resolution because of the weekly analysis.
But where do you get your data from, actually? What is your source? Where does it come from? From your clients itself? Do you have a syndicated approach? How do you work this?
Yeah, we source our data directly from the airlines.
Okay.
So they provide us on a weekly basis their information, and we anonymize that, aggregate that, and provide it back to them.
Okay. Then over to you, Robert.
Thanks very much. Okay, obviously the timeliness of the publication and the granularity in terms of weekly data is also a key element of the TAC index. As said, when I was still in charge of air freight at one of the majors, we had absolutely no real or near real-time air freight pricing trends that we could benchmark on a neutral basis, and also obviously no structured capturing of historic data. And so we recognized this need to develop this, and that's basically what we did with the TAC index. What came on top is that the current contracting between the parties, be they shippers and forwarders and carriers, is in our opinion not really efficient and not state of the art anymore. because the tenders is a very cumbersome and expensive effort on both ends. BSAs is risk transfer, and but also does not make everybody happy. And obviously, to work all on spot pricing is also not an opportunity. So in order to present new ways people can contract, an index is an absolute necessity. And obviously with the tech index, we have now established this. And furthermore, and this is also very important looking forward and looking at the risk management tools that become available once an established index is there, opens up also all new opportunities, because currently, as said, the shippers are trying to push the risk to the forwarders by locking them in on annual contracts. The forwarder and the carrier are trying to address this issue through BSAs. But other than that, there are no real risk management tools available. And with the index established now, this will become possible. And I'll talk a bit more in detail about this at the end of the conversation.
Excellent. So, but also I asked the same question to Neil. What is the source of your data? Where do you get your data from, actually?
We source our data exclusively from freight forwarders.
Okay.
They give us transactional data on a weekly basis. And as I have been talking about, the contract is also worth mentioning here. So we cover all types of contracts the forwarders have entered with the carriers. And since we capture it at source, we also have no missing data if, for example, certain airlines are not using the settlement system, or if contracts are settled bilaterally between the carriers and the forwarders. So we capture all this data. Also the forwarders, and this is a trend that we are seeing as a response to the current capacity situation, people who are operating their own regular flights, I'm not talking emergency charters, but the regular flights are also covered in our data.
Excellent. So over to you again, Neil. How would you describe what your product really delivers to the industry and to, of course, your clients who buy your services, your data?
We provide context. We provide context how the airline performed relative to the market dynamics. I mean, every airline, of course, has its own internal data, and they can see that from 1 week to the next, for example, they increased their volumes by 10%. What they lacked was at 10% above or below the market. So we provide context, and that 10% has quite a different flavor if the market went up by 20% or the market went up by 2%. So we provide context through which airlines can determine their actions, their mainly tactical actions, to adjust their capacity, their price, and how the market is responding to those tactics. So we give them feedback on how their decisions were absorbed by the market.
Would you also describe it that they also can then do, and as we know, mostly carriers nowadays actually decide on their network related to the passenger figures, but with your services coming in, I mean, this would be an excellent add-on of data and information to decide which cargo routes make sense and which not, if you talk about load factors, etc.
Well, I think we've come in the current situation that it's the world a little bit upside down.
Exactly.
That, the latest cargo figures determine which passenger network might be viable instead of the other way around, because this is confirmed by many airlines that we've spoken to. In the past, cargo was perhaps perceived a freeloader on belly flights. Now it's the passengers in many cases. Not all flights, of course, but in many cases, the flight is being paid for by cargo. And on top of that, it's nice if they have some passenger revenues, but without the cargo, many of those flights would be unsustainable, even in the short term.
Of course, talking about freighters, and we're seeing 737-800 passenger flight flying 30 tons of cargo, or I think Emirates loaded the 777 passenger aircraft with 67 tons of cargo. So it's an upside, like you said, a turned around world basically, and I think definitely then this tells me actually your product or the usage of your product will make more sense for the carriers in the future under these new, let's say, economic conditions. But Robert, I mean, since you are pulling the data from forwarders, how would you really describe what your product delivers to the industry as such?
Yeah, as said before, basically it's the near real-time information that is only available through TAG Index. Everybody else publishes with a delay of between 4 to 6 weeks. And as Neil mentioned before, I mean, its data is also perishable. So we publish every Monday around lunchtime, GMT. For the previous week. And obviously, as you go into the week, the quality of the data, the value, not the quality, sorry, the value of the data is deteriorating. So for people to really understand what has happened on the pricing side in the previous week is extremely important when you steer your sales force, when you do your spot pricing, or even if you want to have automated learning of your pricing tools. So this opens up all new avenues that you cannot do if you use monthly data or even weekly data, however, with a delay of 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay. Should we dive actually into your decks and let's have a look at what you're offering, what data? Should I start with your slides, Robert?
No, we should start with Neil because Neil is going to give a global overview
Okay.
on the capacity and load factor, and then we'll see how capacity, load factor, and pricing correlate.
Good. Then let me present Neil's slides and then over to Neil. Just give me a second. Tell me when you can see my screen. Now you see my calendar. And here is the deck of slides. Can you see them?
Yes.
Yes.
Very well.
There's your first slide.
But I do see request control, but that's probably not appearing in the video, huh?
No.
Okay. So thank you for that, Christian. So the slide I would like to start off with, let's take a global perspective. And what we have on this slide are week over week and year over year growth analysis based on the data we received. So this is global. To start off with the blue bars, the first week is the first week of May, which we indexed at 100. And here we can see how the weekly volumes on the road to recovery have been creeping up little by little by little from early May until we just updated the system with the data up to last week, so September 7 to 13. So what we see now that the data, the volumes last week were 26% higher than they were early May. So even though it's not great out there, as everybody knows, the volumes have been creeping up on a week-by-week basis. So the two lines below that show the year-over-year analysis. The blue line is again the demand side, which early May we saw volumes globally tracking 30% less than 2019. And it's been creeping up, and as of late it's been moving between the minus 15 to 19% versus 2019. So it's already come a long way, but nowhere near the zero line yet.
Let me ask you one question. So compared actually to the capacity which was on the market, you would say at the moment from last week or this week, there's 20% less capacity on the market, but even the demand is lower than last year. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, the orange line, it's a bit minus 28% versus last year, and the volumes are minus 20%. So exactly, so the gap between the blue line and the orange line indicates how much more the capacity fell than demand. As a result of which, the load factor would go up, and that is what that's what we see globally. that flights are very full. And if you could please turn to the next slide. Here we can see, so this is back to May 2018 on the left side, and the last bar is again last week. Here we have the dynamic load factor on a weekly basis for the last, 30 months or so. And the dynamic load factor, as I mentioned earlier, takes into account both the volume utilization as well as the weight utilization of the aircraft. And what we can see here that a few weeks ago, the industry reached a personal best with a dynamic load factor of 71%.
Yeah.
Which is higher than the load factors we typically see during peak season. Now, I know peak 2019 wasn't great, but the peak season in 2018 was really good. And even then, so in the months leading up to Christmas, the global load factor was lower than it was during the normal slack season a few weeks ago at 71%. And this is all a result of the capacity being reduced far more than demand fell.
Okay.
One remark I would like to make here is that if you hear, well, a load factor of 70%, what is that? That doesn't seem as if flights are full. But if we take into consideration that because of trade imbalances, a practical load factor might be on a global scale maximum 75%, maybe a little bit more, it means that flights are really, really full at the moment. And that is clearly reflected in the higher rates that we see in the market. And I believe that Robert will highlight some of the key trade lanes and how those yields have been developing.
So shall I move over to Robert's deck?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Just whilst you do this, just a few remarks. Obviously, on pricing trends, a global trend is good for analysts and economists. However, for the industry players, they need to have more granularity. So we have looked at two major trade lanes, China to Europe and US, and China to the US in just as comparison. As said, the global trends on pricing don't really mean a lot, so we just look here at the last quarter a bit in more detail. But just coming back to the source of the data again, so that people really can understand the value of the data and the quality that we produce. We get from our data providers both master and house available data, and except obviously of shipper consignee and selling price information and the commodity. And then we apply statistical filtering and we do a weighting of our data providers so that we have also complied with all antitrust regulations. And we can really state that the price that we publish represents accurately the general cargo. So as said, we filter out the perishables and the outliers high and low. And therefore, this index is really representative. So when we now look at the chart in particular, I just highlight a few points here. But what we can see that the pricing gap in principle between China, Hong Kong, US and China, Hong Kong to Europe is narrowing. The Trans-Pacific normally is actually higher, but due to the different capacity provided, this gap is currently narrowing. So we have seen, if you look at the year-over-year comparison, that on the Trans-Pacific, the rates have come down slightly versus China, Hong Kong to Europe, where prices have gone up nearly 10%. And if we compare it to previous year pricing year over year, the Trans-Pacific is still 60% higher than it was a year ago, whilst on the lanes China to Europe, the pricing difference is 50%. So from the very high 80-90% difference, it has slightly come down. And it will be interesting to see what is obviously happening when hopefully more regular production starts again, and the peak season that everybody is talking about. Now, if we look, if you can go to the next slide, please. If we look at the transatlantic, here we obviously have a slightly different picture.
Wow.
As you can see, and the prices have actually gone down quite a bit since if we look at the year-over-year comparison here, but they are gradually increasing. However, are still about 10 to 15% lower than a year ago. So compared to they are gradually increasing, but are still 10 to 15% lower. But compared to last year, the prices are still about 80% higher on the eastbound and staggering 180% higher on the westbound. And I would really be interested to see whether Clive sees a similar trend on the load factors, but we'll come to that hopefully in a minute.
Here's a spoiler alert. We do.
You do. Okay.
So, I mean, now having seen both of your decks, and of course, one is price related, the other is load factor related, and we're seeing, I mean, I know the cargo market is very volatile, but we are seeing a lot of fluctuation week over week. So, how would you put that in the context? How can your data then really help your clients or the industry?
Okay. Principally, people have been looking at the data on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis and made a decision based on that. I mean, you had obviously your budgets, you had your flight schedule season, and now you have to go then to the next slide. You can bring it up already, okay, Chris. But this is in today's fast-paced environment not good enough anymore, because as we have seen, most airlines have broken their contracts with the forwarders, as well as many forwarders have broken their contracts with the shippers, and people are now going more on monthly pricing or even weekly pricing. So at the beginning of the week, they agree on a price, and then cargo is moved at this price. Therefore, it is absolutely paramount that everybody has the same information they can agree upon on the variance to the previous week, and then get a good understanding what prices are doing. Now here I have just one example. If we look at China to Singapore in both directions, we can see that obviously week over week there are big fluctuations, and sometimes even up to 50%. Now this lane, you may say, may not be extremely representative, but obviously due to the COVID crisis, there has been a huge pickup by e-commerce. And if you have to price your products and you understand that there is big pricing differences week over week, then you can, as a carrier or as a e-commerce provider, obviously schedule your deliveries and pick the weekdays where prices are generally lower. And this, again, offers opportunities for both sides. And the key statement here is always, we as an index provider, we only provide information. It is then up to the market contestants to turn this information into intelligence. And obviously this opens up, again, big opportunities to really differentiate from the competition.
I mean, absolutely. If you look at such a weekly developments, I mean, there's a lot of room actually to pull the intelligence out of there to see also from a carrier perspective intelligence. So really thankful for this very interesting insight, Robert. But timeliness and accuracy are obviously actually key topics here and in air cargo, and particularly also in the management of data. Neil, what do you see when looking at the capacity load factor development on a regional basis, for example?
Could you, thank you for that question. Could you bring up my slides, please? And we'll have a
There you go.
2 slides I would like to briefly highlight. Mm-hmm. So one is from China to Europe, and a couple of months ago, when we're at the peak in May, the PPE peak in May of this year, we saw volumes out of China into Europe that were more than 50% higher on a weekly basis than they were in that same week, 2019. When that peak started to come down, we had many industry watchers commenting on, oh, where is the industry heading? It's going to be a free fall. There's no life after PPE. What's going to happen? So we've been closely following that. And as of many things in life, it did not turn out to be as bad as one feared. Because if we look now in last week, September 7 to 13, the volumes are roughly what they were at the beginning of the year. But more relevant compared to last year, the volumes are up 1.5% versus that same week in 2019. So even though there's still some PPE materials floating around, the industry is getting back on its feet slowly, and the volumes out of China into Europe are definitely not as bad as people had feared. So there is, our slogan is now, or our remark is, there is life after PPE.
Absolutely, yeah.
And or maybe we should phrase it now, there is life before vaccines. Because that's the next topic, of course, people will talk about. So this is when we're looking at the, and this also closely matches or strongly correlates to the numbers that Robert showed previously on the rate development from China, Hong Kong to Europe, with the big peak that we saw a while ago, and then slowly flattening out. The reason why the rates are higher is because the capacity is still far less out of Asia Pacific into Europe than it was previously.
Would you also say that this peak came from that China started production again and the factories were opening?
And which peak are you referring to? The one in May? No, that is driven by PPE. That was the big engine behind that peak. Because once that, as you can see, once that demand decreased, it also came down quite rapidly.
Understood.
To more normal levels.
Next slide.
Yes, please. So this is also on the Atlantic. On the left-hand side, we see the eastbound capacity and load factor developments. So the bar indicates the indexed capacity, which we indexed in the beginning of the year at 100. And the orange line relates to the axis on the right-hand side, which is our dynamic load factor. So, and if you can recall the stats that Robert just showed with regards to the yield, so you could see, if I recall correctly, about 180% increase in yields westbound and about 80% increase year over year westbound. Sorry, 180% westbound and about 80% eastbound.
Correct.
And it's also reflected in these numbers. Because if you look at the load factor from North America to Europe, it's not as elevated as it is from Europe to North America, because it's now tracking, what is it, between the 65 and 70% the last couple of weeks, while the westbound Europe to North America load factor is tracking in the 80s, coming down from 90s a while ago. So what we also see here, that when the capacity was pulled, the passenger flights were pulled from the Atlantic, the load factor jumped to the high 70s and the high 90s from Europe to North America. And when the capacity was slowly brought back again, and you saw it recently slowly sliding backwards. But to put this into perspective, on average, the load factor across the Atlantics are 20 percentage points higher than they were last year. Unbelievable. I mean, So it's no surprise that the rates are highly elevated still. For some of the viewers that think, hey, what's happening from North America to Europe? We see a decline in the load factor, actually quite a stark decline for the last week. We believe that is no reason to be concerned, because that's likely related to Labor Day, which took place last week on the Monday. Many shops, outfits are closed, probably very little cargo offered to the market, and therefore a drop in load factor. Interesting to see that you do not see that drop from Europe to North America. So it's mainly an origin issue, and we've seen a similar pattern evolve around the 4th of July, as well as Thanksgiving. That is mainly the origin side which is hurt most when it comes to the decline in volumes, and not so much the destination traffic. So overall, and then I'll stop talking. So a strong correlation between load factor developments and the pricing analysis as made by the TAC index.
I think this is absolutely amazing. And, you know, talking about the Labor Day, and I mean, we know other incidents actually during the course of New Year, including Chinese New Year, but it really shows how volatile actually air cargo is. And I'm absolutely fascinated by these graphs and really seeing these developments also in the context of PPE, etc. And of course, having both of you on the call, the correlation between capacity and price, amazing. But when I take this into account, and I think talking about the road to recovery and perhaps future incidents, or let's say the next close down because of COVID, everybody talks about another incident there. What options do you see to manage actually the risks associated to this volatility, and perhaps the unpredictable better using or due to this unpredictability, how can the usage of data improve actually the way we all are working? Robert.
Okay, yeah, thanks for this question. As said earlier, I'm happy to briefly talk about this, since the prerequisite to be able to launch any new types of contracts or risk management tools by insurance companies or the finance industry is a trusted and accepted index. TAC index is this trusted and established industry benchmark, which is accepted by forwarders, carriers, and shippers. And we have then taken some look at other industries, and the most prominent example is the dry bulk ocean freight industry, where index-linked agreements and freight forward agreements have become practice over the years, and we are now seeing that some companies are trying to launch these index-linked agreements, or also AFAS. Freight Investor Services in London is one of the leaders in this field, and they have been very active. Ultimately, what we can say is two things. Number one, if you, for example, go on an index-linked agreement versus a BSA, then every market participant knows that he pays or gets paid a fair market price. That's number one. You can still differentiate around this index price, obviously by agreeing on the actual price to be paid. Considering all the quality aspects, direct versus indirect, tier 1 carrier, tier 2 carrier, this is all still possible, but the underlying index has to be agreed upon, and this is really the major point of an index. The absolute numbers that we publish are not really the most important point. The most important is how the price fluctuated over the previous week and over the months, then obviously if you go into historic data. And then by offering these AFAS, then you can also basically go out of the physical market and hedge your pricing in the paper market. it all sounds very complex, and I think it would obviously be great if there would be an opportunity for FIS to talk in one of these expert talks in the near future.
I think we should agree on a session on that, because I also would like to learn more about that area and what it can bring to the industry. I think also we are running out of time, but to close the meeting, perhaps one last question, also from a perspective from IBS. We hear a lot about revenue management, especially in the airline space, and there are a lot of vendors out there. Also, we are a provider of a revenue management system. So in that beauty, each one of you, how would you perceive actually the data you provide or could provide to an airline, and that feed it into a data lake, which basically the airline runs its algorithms against in a revenue management system? Perhaps you can comment on that, Neil.
My current understanding of the revenue management systems is that they either work, they work with internal data, and they work likely with some external data. But there's the issue. The external data that most of these systems use is outdated the moment it's plugged into the system. So in a current very volatile environment, it is very tricky to make any automated pricing decisions based on prices or volumes or load factor that were taking place 6 weeks ago. Only taking decisions based on your internal data also skews the results. So we see definitely, and that was one of the reasons why we founded this. Yes, air cargo will always remain a people's business, but there will be a component where we'll start making automated prices where it's fundamental. Let me take a step back. I don't believe you can predict air cargo. So I fully acknowledge if you want to share the risk, you go into index and all associated risk products around there. But you also want to have some room to maneuver, to play the market a little bit, and have a dynamic pricing to benefit as much as you can from the spot market. And in that, the humans will become too slow, will become too complicated. So the systems will arrive that will make a true dynamic price based on the latest market intelligence. And we see definitely a role for us feeding those kind of systems with the outside perspective. Because as I mentioned, having a full flight doesn't mean you can raise prices if everybody else is maybe flying at 80%. Or if you see volumes go up on your side, but you see volumes going up on the market level twice as much, that tells you that should be treated differently by the algorithm than without that context. So yes, we definitely see this kind of information, this timely kind of information, this granular kind of information becoming an integral part of these kind of revenue management systems. Absolutely.
So over to you, Robin. You have the last word of today before I close the meeting. I mean, we heard about dynamic pricing, and I mean, I think from an airline perspective, it is key to know what would be the buyer's rate when I'm selling, or like Neil said, we all have new distribution channels, automation portals where we want to book our cargo and we want to get a price. And I also want to have a decision if I fly the cargo on different days, what different prices is offered. But how would you see how TAC Index would bring a benefit there actually to offer dynamic pricing to the market?
Okay, thanks for this question. Since Neil has already mentioned many of the things that obviously are also valid for the pricing, let me just stick to one or two things. First of all, if you have this weekly data, transactional data, then you know from all the different contracts that have been closed or signed between the parties what they have actually paid. And this is extremely important. And for me, it's facts and data are facts. In our case, definitely take out a lot of emotions in the discussions, because I remember these weekly or monthly sales conferences where people were arguing about pricing. Oh, I heard, and last week it was different and things like this. So you can eliminate this discussion. what you can then obviously also use if you have your pricing desks not sitting really in every city, but you can then group these pricing desks in regions and have them see the TAC index on their screen. So when they do pricing decisions and they know last week they have been able to get a hit rate of 80% of the spot shipments when they were within a certain percentage above the index, and if they go beyond that, then the hit rate drops. I mean, this is tremendous know-how that you can use and play with. And what is also important for you carrier clients who use a lot of GSAs. GSAs also have a tendency to give their view on the pricing of their market, and that may not always be 100% accurate. So the airlines do have an independent source to really understand the pricing level and the development.
Okay, then I want to thank at this point, really thankful for these insights, and I will have more look into this, and like I say, we will have another session about the FIS, but for me, what comes out of this meeting, actually, data is absolutely paramount and the usage of data. But what I understood today, it's also the value of data. It loses the value how actual or how old the data actually is. So with you being on weekly providers, I think this is amazing for the industry. Let's hope we will see some traction on this. Thank you.
Thank you again for the opportunity, and the viewers for staying on.
Thank you.